first of all, I just want to give you all a shout out for that and for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I'm also wondering if each of you could just pretend for a moment, you addressed this all a little bit in your presentations, but if you were making a pitch to a major funder and they said, tell me about your so what factor. You know, if you had 1 minute to tell me what's the importance of your research, how would you describe it to me in 1 minute? So I'm about to give you a bunch of money, you just have to tell me why your research is so important. So if you want to each, starting with, we'll just go in order of your presentation, starting with Cesar.
Yes. So organizations such as the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control have identified obesity as a disease. So they've also reported that the onset of obesity and diabetes has doubled, and the onset of obesity has doubled in recent decades, and the onset of diabetes has tripled in recent decades. So these are millions and billions of individuals who are classified as overweight, obese, or having type 2 diabetes. So our lab group is interested in understanding how different kinds of diets can prevent those negative health outcomes that are associated with diabetes and obesity. Therefore, if we can identify a composition of food groups or a composition of fats for individuals to consume, then we could potentially suggest to a large scope of individuals to say that if you consume this, then you can prevent insulin resistance. If you exercise, then this is what happens to your metabolism, and in turn preventing insulin resistance or preventing type 2 diabetes.
Thank you.
Okay, so the research that we're doing attempts to comprehend and empathize with target specific user segments of particular technologies, and this empathic approach proposes that the users of these products obtain a improved customer satisfaction after using those products. So this can be beneficial for industry in the sense that it can increase the revenues for them. It can make them more competitive in the marketplace, and it can enable the users of these technologies to be more proficient and do more with this same technology. So that's all.
Thank you.
Okay, so our redesigned socket, it allows patients that have a more comfortable weight. So if you were to sponsor us and give us a lot of money, we're going to give this comfort for patients that they're not going to be now hospitalizing or changing their socket every 1.5 years. We're going to have a more chance of having a higher quality of life by having a more comfortable way of wearing their prosthesis. We're going to reduce their problems with skin and tissue. And also we're going to help clinicians and everyone who is in the market in providing a better quality of products. So they're going to have better and more happier customers. For patients, they're going to have a better revenue, and also they're going to increase their how to say, the name of their companies or things like that. So I'll say that.
Thank you. Thank you all. Other questions or specific questions about any of their presentations?
Yeah, I have a question for the, particularly for the amputees. So you mentioned actually the perspective, like you design the new one is from the comfortable level, like from this perspective. Do you have other consideration? Let's say the cost or the stability, balance, those things.
Yes. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention stability. Well, both of the plates have the same diameter, and they provide a more stable weight in the sense of collapsing the four struts at the same time. So also about cost, is going to reduce, of course, over time the use or the fact that they need to replace their socket or their prosthesis every 1.5 years. So a prosthesis costs about $8,000 just a socket. So you need to also buy the other components. And if you are replacing this socket for an adjustable socket, it's going to at least save you each year $8,000. We believe it's gonna last like 3 years or so, and Yes, I don't know if you can.
To me, I think those are more important than comfortable. If I'm the person having a lot of money, I would consider from economic perspective, not from comfortable.
So my question is more directed towards your first presentation. I believe your presentation was really good. You provided the breakdown of what happens with the fat in the body. Just from my perspective, my question to you is, this is really related to diet and exercise. So as a research perspective, have you thought of maybe going into more of the behavioral aspect of how are you going to get people who are obese or, you know, have that kind of behavior of not eating well and not exercising, how you'll implement that so that way they can have that behavioral change to improve the statistics that you presented?
We do consider some aspects in terms of the behavioral approach. I mean, it's difficult for individuals who have never exercised, who have been sedentary for their whole lives, to all of a sudden implement an exercise program for 10 weeks and tell them, well, this is gonna change your life. But they've never really followed a program like this before. So adherence and compliance to a program like this, or even to a diet program, not only exercise, becomes difficult. We don't exactly look at too many behavioral approaches, as you mentioned. However, you do make a really good point, so it would help many of our approaches and many of our studies to use that perspective compared to strictly only exercise and diabetes, or in terms of the metabolism. But that's a very good point, Saeed.
I have a question. Now that you mentioned metabolism, I would assume that polyunsaturated fats are harder to metabolize than monounsaturated fat. Am I in the right track or not really?
There is a difference in the molecular structure. I'm not too familiar with the breakdown or the biochemistry of each one of these, but I do know that when you oxidize fats, they're broken down into 2 carbon molecules, and these are acetyl-CoAs. So acetyl-CoAs are what enter the pathway for lipid oxidation. So I do know that the molecular structure of each one of these does impact that sort of breakdown or that process. But as far as the biochemistry of these, I can't.
Well, the thing I asked about that question is because it intrigued me that you saw very similar responses except for the last one, GLUT4. And I was thinking that it may be a metabolic rate kind of issue, you know, in triggering that particular response. I just found it very interesting. And my next, and more an observation than anything else, have you thought of doing the experiment but with saturated fats just to see what are the typical responses or the changes in metabolic rates in GLUT4?
Looking primarily at saturated fats?
Yeah.
So we used the Western diet group that we showed. That one was predominantly saturated fat. So it was relatively higher in that type of fat when compared to the other ones. Although we couldn't say that it was high saturated fat, but it was just more relative to the other ones. Other studies have showed, early studies initially showed that diets high in saturated fat contributed to a greater risk of cardiovascular disease.
Right.
However, in recent years, there's been a number of studies that are beginning to question this. So I mentioned that our group showed that in high-fat overfeeding in humans, it contributes to weight gain. However, it's difficult to come by very well-controlled overfeeding studies in humans. So many of these models come from animal studies. And as I mentioned, the early ones showed that there's an increased risk with saturated fat, but now recent evidence is showing that this may not necessarily be the case. So I think that we still need some more time to sort of come to a conclusion in regard to saturated fats.
That's troubling. So all fats are not good, huh?
Don't even noodle so much.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Okay.
So I'd like to go ahead and thank the presenters for their really awesome, insightful presentations, and also you as the audience members for joining us today. Just as a reminder to the judges in the room, please turn in your score sheets to me or to this box up front, also your comment sheets. We hope that you will visit the other presentations throughout the day, including the poster presentations at 2 o'clock, and then also join us in the afternoon at our reception that begins at 4:30 and the award ceremony which begins at 5:15. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.